There's one thing that I would implore, your viewership and all sailors is to recognize that, life is hard, but it's harder when you do silly things. It's harder when you self-impose stresses that all you had to do was follow the rules and do the right thing. Or maybe not just for you, but when you see somebody going off the rails a little bit, hey, if you're just a little bit off the rails by an inch, it's not that hard to get back on. If you're off the rails by a mile, maybe not so much. So say something, do something, be a good shipmate. All those things, I think in the end lend to resilience as a force. And then, of course, that's built on the resilience of individuals as individuals.
Well, hello Sasebo, and hello Navy Region Japan. This is Chaplain Lawrence here with another episode of Taps with Chaps. Today is my guest. I want to introduce Captain Rich LeBron, who's the Commodore of Amphibious Squadron 11. Comes to the Navy with over 30 years of Navy experience as a commanding officer, and now here in Sasebo in charge of the ARG that's based here. And so thank you, sir, for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Chaps.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? What's your story?
I joined the Navy in 1989, straight out of high school, and I was enlisted and did submarines for my first enlistment and first and only enlistment, and then I got picked up for the ROTC program. Went to University of San Diego, where I graduated with a degree in marine science, and the rest is history, as they say. Spent a career doing destroyers, and when I screened for Major Command, I got the blessing. It was like, hey, you're going to do a Major Command Amphibious, and I didn't know much about that. It was a totally new area, so steep learning curve, kind of a little bit stressful there, going into something I didn't know about. But when the detailer asked me, well, you screened for Amphibious Major Command, what do you want? I said, well, I don't know much about amphibious, but I'll take the big one. So I ended up going to Bonhomme Richard, and luck of the draw would be I ended up out here in FDNF, which again I hadn't done before, and it's been an incredible experience. Lots of operational time, incredible focus from the sailors that are attached to these ships, and go.
Yeah.
So it's that's 30 years in a nutshell.
FDNF has a totally different pace, I'd imagine, than other commands.
It does, although the first time I came out here without my family, and I've been married 24 years, and Susan and I, we have 6 kids together. They've grown up Navy the entire time. In fact, my oldest 2 are active duty. My son's a Marine, and my oldest daughter is a cryptologic technician in the Navy. And then my number 3 is in the process of enlisting right now. So they've seen the service, they've seen the sacrifices, and they're signing up to go do exactly that, which I think it's a point of pride for me, that at least they've seen that service is a worthy endeavor. The time here the first time without the family, though, was way more stressful than the time now with my family here. I mean, although that brings its own set of challenges and stresses, it gets me out of the ship. First time I lived on the ship, I stayed on the ship, I kind of stayed on base and right here in the nearby community, and didn't see much, didn't do much but work. And of course that had its impact. It has an impact on anybody, and I'm no exception. And then it also had an impact on the family, but we brought us all back together, did some time in San Diego together, and then we brought them all out here so I can do my time as the Commodore.
I think that's a great kind of segue and introduction into kind of the topic that we want to discuss today, which is resiliency. Resiliency in our sailors, in our force, in our families, all of us who are kind of part of the Navy Marine Corps family. How would you define resiliency? What does that look like as a Commodore and a commanding officer?
Well, from an abstract way to answer that, it's a racquetball ball. You can whack the heck out of that thing back and forth, but when you pick it up at the end, it's still round. It still has its flexibility and its bounce back, and the game's over. Only to get ready to do another game, and that would be, I guess, a good illustration of what resiliency really is being able to take a beating and bounce right back and keep doing the job and challenging the environment. rather than let the environment completely consume you. And that I think is a good illustration. You know, more down to earth in terms of Navy. You know, resilience is our ability to do life and service and sacrifice and continue coming back for more. You know, some people call it toughness too. I mean, that's a good allegory for it. It's just, you know, it's a Timex, right? Yeah. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
And that's exactly what former CNO Admiral Richardson called, you know, defined toughness is the ability to take a hit and keep moving forward. And so, yeah, toughness and resiliency are almost kind of one and the same in many regards. What are some of the resiliency issues that you've seen or you've experienced as a ship's CO, as a Commodore, that are kind of common threads in sailors and families?
Really, with families, it all boils down to, you know, time apart and you know, the challenges that come with that, the children, the spouses, and then along that is, you know, incomplete communication, you know, and incomplete expectations management, and incomplete expectations period from the service member too. We have a tendency to, at least I do anyway, have a tendency to kind of be a little self-centered. You know, it's I'm going, I'm leaving, I'm the one that's deployed, I'm coming back, I'm reintegrating, I'm working up, I'm training, or I'm providing the training, and then I'm getting ready to go again, and I'm leaving and I'm coming back. And when you get in that type of mental gerbil wheel, if you will, it's very easy to forget that. Yeah, it's you that's doing all this, but boy, there's a huge support system, whether it's family, friends, you know, whatever it is that the supporting cast for that individual is. You know, for me, it's my family, it's my wife and kids, and you know, I've been guilty of taking that for granted multiple times, and it does have its effect. You know, eventually the family says no more and says, hey, you need to put us first. And rightly so. So that's a source of stress. It's a huge source of stress. And likewise, you know, being able to navigate through that lends to that resilience. You know, in my case, I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest with you, chaps. You know, I'm no different than any sailor out there. Well, maybe perhaps the difference is I'm not only a sufferer of stress, you know, which comes with service, but I'm also a carrier now that I have, you know, a squadron of ships, or I was in command. You know, I generate some of that stress through, you know, adherence through standards and expectations and driving to success and trying to make sure that the piece of the Navy that I have been entrusted to guide and lead is in and of itself resilient to be able to do the missions. And that resilience from that perspective comes to, you know, maintenance and platform readiness, which in turn is dependent upon sailors and their ability to maintain them and all the challenges that go with that.
I think that's a good point as to why resiliency is important as a force. You know, what is the driving force there of why do we need to be resilient? And part of that is staying operationally ready, staying fit to fight. Have you had any experience in terms of your career where resiliency played like a really key part in a deployment or a workup or a maintenance period or an avail or anything like that?
Every day. You know, yeah, there's points where they're more accented or accentuated than others, but every day there's a challenge. Every day there's something that isn't quite right that needs to be made right. Every day there's a element that we have to start working towards because we need to go execute something. But to answer your question more pointedly, I remember as a lieutenant, I was chief engineer on board the Milius out of San Diego, and that's when 9/11 happened. And I was on board the I think it was the Steedham at the time. They were doing an in-serve inspection, and I was there as an observer trying to figure out, you know, how that happens and how that all process works so that we can execute it on my ship. And I remember one of the guys comes in and says, hey, you need to come see this. And I go and I see, you know, the first hit. And, I'm like, wow, that's tragic. That's terrible. Of course, there's no register there. I just see it as an accident, you know. And then minutes later, you know, the second one hits. And, of course, we all knew immediately right there and then what was going on. And, you know, I left the ship, went to mine, and they locked us down, you know. And we had I could be wrong on the timeline, but I think we had less than 72 hours to deploy, and of course we couldn't leave the ship, and here I am trying to, the things that normally take weeks or months prior to a deployment, and prepping the family, not just psychologically prepping for separation, but also the physical preparation, the wills, the powers of attorney, the paying the bills ahead of time, all those things that folks do, we didn't have a chance to do, right? So my wife had to pick up the ball and start bouncing all over the place. I didn't even have clothes on board the ship. I didn't even have underwear. I had sailors that were allowed to go shopping for a group, and here we all toss in money so they can go get us some basic necessities, and the wife's trying to put together my sea bag, something that quite frankly, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but she knows nothing about. It's not what she does, and she's trying to figure it out to get me out the door. And then there was no left and right limits to it. It was, you're going to deploy for how long? Who knows, right? And we ended up doing Noble Eagle. It wasn't a particularly stressful operation, but it was vital. It gave the American people a confidence that the Navy was out there watching their backs, and ultimately that's what we do. And as long as we can maintain that trust and confidence of the American people in what we do as a Navy, then the Navy continues to be a viable part of our nation. And we were born as a maritime nation. We will always be a maritime nation, just by geography, if not by choice. And the Navy plays a huge part in that. So we need to maintain that confidence. And in order to do that, sailors need to be able to confidently go operate. And in order to do that, they have to be able to deal with life and the curveballs that life throws at us, and still be able to continue to operate. Some of that is individual choices. Some of that is a function of what we do as leaders.
Yeah. And I thank you for that story. I mean, that's a really great point in your own life, where there was a definitive moment and a world event that really was a resiliency opportunity and test for you. And I think today, especially now, we have another similar event where it's kind of a seminal moment in the resiliency fight, which is COVID-19, and how that has affected us as a force, as families, as service members. Could you speak a little bit to what you've seen in terms of resiliency reactions or issues in the COVID world, what that looks like, and what you think that might look like down the road, so to speak?
So COVID's tough because we can't see it, and I mean, I'm not going to speak for the world, but I'll tell you, for one, I don't understand it, in the sense that you see it spike, you see it go, you see it spike, you see it go, you wear a mask, you don't wear masks, you can go here, but you can't go there. It's a tough thing to nail down. And because of who we are as an American people, freedom-loving, free will exercising, all those things that make us who we are, right? Assembly, social, let me go to a restaurant, let me go to a bar, let me go to a club, let me socialize, let me meet people. And we've been taught from the time we were small that, people are important and you want to connect with people. I mean, kindergarten, right? Playing with friends and all that. It's who we are. It's in our DNA, at least as Americans. What's made it difficult is that in order for us to curb this particular challenge, it requires almost the exact opposite, right? It requires breaking social norms. I couldn't shake your hand when we walked in, right? And to me, that's as natural as breathing. As an individual, I see someone, I go and give them a firm handshake, and say hello, and I'm a hugger too, right? So I see somebody I haven't seen in a long time, I like to give them a hug and say hello, and have that personal connection that then you can build into other things. And the COVID piece has been very restrictive in that. So in that sense, that's stressful. It's against our grain. It also is, we tell people, hey, you're going to overseas, you're going to go, you're part of the Navy, you're showing the flag, you're engaging with the community, you're part of galvanizing that relationship and ensuring our access to do other things, right? To be based here to do other things and do the away game. That also requires our ability to build relationships with the local community. Something that, quite frankly, when I got here, my wife and I both started doing energetically, and just like that, we had to stop. We had to stop meeting them at restaurants, or at the dance hall, or at the bar, or even at the park, and have fun and have my kids meet some of the Japanese kids and build those relationships, and all that just kind of came to a screeching halt. So my personal experience was that was very stressful. At the time when it really started accelerating, I was on patrol, and so we're looking at it from afar, and we're starting to see the numbers tick, and of course now you start worrying about, oh my, is my family going to be affected? Is my family going to be impacted? And then what does that mean? Does that mean that I then can't see them when I come home? And fortunately, Sasebo's been COVID-free for the most part, and it's been through discipline and very strong engagement with the leadership here, both on the Japanese side and on the American side. But nevertheless, the biggest stress there is the uncertainty that comes from it. And then you see things like what happened, on the aircraft carrier that had multiple COVID cases, and just how fast it accelerated. We lost a shipmate there. That's stress-inducing, right? You get to my level, we're kind of getting close to, if not already at that age where you become a high-risk factor. You start wondering, okay, do I seclude myself? How can I lead on the deck plates and show sailors that I'm there for them if I have to kind of stay in my stateroom or put on a mask or hide, so to speak? How do we do that? And so all that lack of understanding and familiarity with it is definitely stress-inducing, and it induces stress with the families, and that stress goes from, I guarantee you, that stress goes all the way from the CNO to the brand new seaman recruit that just joined the Navy and is in boot camp today. Nobody remains unaffected by this thing. And quite frankly, the Navy leadership has said as much. We're just going to have to learn to live with it. And there's a new normal, and we may have to readjust our expectations in terms of how we socialize and how we interact with people. And that's stressful too. We have our ways, and we like our ways. And that's very stressful. So I think that covered your question.
Yeah, and I think as a Navy, there's definitely an adjustment period, especially for younger, more junior sailors or spouses and dependents, coming from the United States, coming from CONUS, where there's a picture of a normal there, versus FD&F where fleet readiness, ship readiness is really a top priority, especially where we're located geographically in this part of the world, where we absolutely have to make sure that we can maintain our force readiness as much as humanly possible, and that affects what we do, where we can go, how we can interact with the community.
Exactly.
Things exactly what you talked about.
Yeah, home to work and work to home's no fun.
Right.
But it's what we have to do right now to, to your point, to ensure that readiness, and that is the number one priority. It's nothing else. Everything else is looked at through that lens. If it adds to our readiness, then it's considered very favorably. If it detracts from it, then perhaps not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a big part of the conversation these days, and so for families or individuals or people who maybe are stressing with that, or struggling with COVID, or struggling with resiliency, or any issue really that's related to their life or being in the Navy, what are some of the resources that are available to them, people that they can talk to, places that they can go? What are some of those things that sailors have?
Well, first and foremost, always is a chain of command, and that's your number one resource, and that's where everything stems from. Of course, there's other things. You're one of the resources as a chaplain, and Fleet and Family Services, and mental health, and all that. And I certainly encourage anyone and everyone who has the need, and even those that don't have the need, to explore those resources. As the saying goes, making friends is best when you don't need them. Then you have them when you do, instead of trying to figure out who to go to and what to say when you're under stress. You've already built the rapport in a relationship, perhaps, if anything, professional. So the chain of command is definitely step one. But beyond that, what I will tell you is that step one is follow the rules. Right? So the rules change, and that's where the change of command really comes to the rescue. But follow the rules. The folks that follow the rules they make sacrifices, right? Nobody wants to do work to home to work only. That's not pleasant. But you do that, then we don't get sick. We don't get sick, we stay ready. We stay ready, we do our mission, we come home, and life continues. We don't do that, and then, at the very best case scenario, restrictions get even tighter. At the very worst case scenario, then, disease spreads and readiness suffers, and then we can't do our mission, and it limits, our operational commander's ability to do what the nation needs us to do. And that's really kind of that cardinal sin, if you will, for us as sailors, is not to be ready to answer the call. So follow the rules, so step one, and then talk to the chain of command and use them both as a resource to understand what those rules are, but also as a sounding board, as a mentor or mentors, as a means to understand what it is that we need to do and the why, right? People need to know why. I for one, don't adhere to this philosophy of just do what I told you. It's try to explain why when you can, and most of the time you find that you can. And sailors, that in and of itself enhances their resiliency, because though they may not agree, understanding why they're doing something at least gives them context, and if anything, it gives them something that they can argue against, or they can counter or bring forth ideas and suggestions. And I think that even at my level, all we want is a day in court, so to speak. We want our voices to be heard and our ideas to be considered. But I also recognize, as does every sailor, that sometimes the answer is no, or sometimes the answer is we're going to do something differently than what you suggested, and that's okay. There's no need to stress out about that. But I think as leaders, we owe that ability for them to seek out guidance. And COVID's no different, in my opinion. It's a challenge, but it's no different than all the other challenges that we face as a Navy. And myriad challenges abound. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's what we do. It could be COVID, or it could be an adversary rattling sabers and making us, go on patrol before we expected, or making us extend the patrol to a indeterminate time of return, right? We experienced that in our patrol. Right. We didn't know when we were coming back. We thought we were coming back this month, but because of that adversary, meaning COVID in this case, it got extended. And some other ships were unable to fill, so this got extended again. And all of that because of the challenge of COVID superimposed on the challenges of the theater. So what I would tell sailors is, recognize that you're not going to know everything. That accepting that in and of itself is a big stress relief. So recognize that you're not going to know everything. Recognize that perhaps you don't need to know everything, or even want to. But as much as the chain of command can, we will and obviously should try to keep sailors informed. But recognize that you're not going to know everything all the time. With that comes another big part about resilience, and that's whether it's COVID or any other challenge, and that's trust, right? So we take certain oaths, and part of the officer's oath is to well and faithfully discharge our duties. Perhaps paraphrase there, but that's what we do. And there has to be a trust. When we're doing something, there has to be that inherent trust in the chain of command that we're doing it for the right reasons, certainly for the right reasons, given the information that we have. And sailors also need to be patient. And when I say sailors, I mean all of us have to be patient and recognize that, sometimes circumstances change and decisions naturally change to meet those circumstances. So I would submit that the last thing people want is a chain of command that's so rigid and so intellectually unable to maneuver that when we make a decision, we can't change it. Right. On the contrary, we should be able to. We should be able to flex. We should be able to move. And that's what you see with COVID. As we learn, the nature of the restrictions changes. As numbers go down, things get opened up. As numbers go up, things get closed down. And we're in a continuous learning process. And I, for one, have an incredible amount of trust in my, my upper chain of command, that those directives that are coming down, be they coming from, Captain Stallings, from the region, from CNO, from PAC Fleet, from all those bosses that we have, they're well-intentioned, they're well-suited, and they're preparing us, or if not preparing us, they're enabling us to maintain that readiness. And so it's all a risk calculus. And so I have a trust, and I ask the sailors to have that level of trust as well. And when circumstances change, then let's have that dialogue. And when circumstances change from their perspective, then certainly bring it up the chain of command, or bring it through those support systems like I mentioned earlier, and get us thinking, because there's nothing wrong with challenging too, and get us all thinking about things and moving forward.
Yeah, I think the name of the game right now is the old adage, improvise, adapt, overcome. Sure. For sailors and for family members too. It's a fluid environment. As you said, things will change from week to week, and I think part of what you shared is to some of the success of when we follow the rules, when we are all in this fight together against COVID. We see that it's effective. We see that it works. We see that cases go down or they vanish. And then as a result, things can open back up. We can enjoy more of those freedoms that you were talking about that are just kind of ingrained in us as Americans. And that's part of the resiliency piece, is not just us as individuals being resilient, but we're a piece of a big puzzle, a big force. And so us being resilient helps the entire force be resilient, helps the whole Navy family be resilient. And then we can experience kind of these freedoms that are restricted in a better way.
Oh, absolutely. And I would also submit recognizing that we're not in the United States. And I'm speaking specifically to FDNF, though it's not just applicable here. This is my purview, but we're not back in the United States. Those freedoms that we have grown accustomed to, in reality and in the context of ensuring that we maintain access here, they're privileges, and we want to preserve them. We want to exercise them. We want to go to the full left and right limits of those, because that's how we actually enjoy and do those things. But if we go into the mindset that, hey, things are a little bit more restricted now because in the end it will maintain that trust in the relationship with the local economy, then we won't get so stressed out about it. If we go in with the mindset of, okay, I've grown accustomed to leaving the ship at X time, staying out till X time, and coming back, and it's all good. Well, things change. Okay, well that's the left and right limits of my privilege right now. And then when things get better, they get extended, and again, that goes with following the rules too. Gosh, there's a whole bunch of other stressors out there that are self-imposed. COVID is not self-imposed, but it's a challenge. And quite frankly, I don't see it as a different challenge than anything else that we face. It's just the characteristic of the challenge might be different, but the nature of that challenge is like anything else, right? We lead through it, we learn from it. We lead through it, we learn from it. We listen to the environment, we learn from it, and then we lead. And so there's no difference there. It's just another thing. DUIs is a thing. Staying out beyond curfew is a thing. Those are all challenges too. And those, on the other hand, unlike COVID, those are challenges and stressors that affect the individual's resiliency, that are self-imposed, that are a function of your own personal choices. And if there's one thing that I would implore, your viewership and all sailors, is to recognize that, life is hard. But it's harder when you do silly things, It's harder when you self-impose stresses that all you had to do was follow the rules and do the right thing. Or maybe not just for you, but when you see somebody going off the rails a little bit, hey, if you're just a little bit off the rails by an inch, it's not that hard to get back on. If you're off the rails by a mile, maybe not so much. So say something, do something, be a good shipmate. All those things, I think in the end lend to resilience as a force. And then, of course, that's built on the resilience of individuals as individuals.
Well, thank you so much, Commodore LeBron. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your insights, your experience as a long-term Navy man and CEO and Commodore now at Fibron on this really important topic of resilience. And thank you to all of you, the sailors, the families out here in Navy Region Japan, for all that you continue to do for our force and for our families to maintain our readiness and to stay resilient and respond to whatever the nation calls us to do. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Taps with Chaps, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.